So today what we're going to do is go over one of these writing practice problems where you're asked to solve a problem and explain your reasoning. And we're going to start by explaining and practicing some of the vocabulary for when we're solving by factoring. So let's start with this problem. When we are solving by factoring, it's really important that first our equation equals 0. So in this problem, since I don't equal 0, I'm going to start by subtracting the 9x on both sides. Now when I do that, I get 3x squared minus 9x equals 0. Now in my explanation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write first, because we should always use a sequencing word, and then we're going to say that we subtract 9x on both sides because, and it's very important to use the word because, since that tells us that we're giving the reason, because the equation must equal 0. Next, what we need to do is look for a common factor. The common factor between these two terms would be 3x. So we would write 3x parentheses. Now 3 divided by 3 is 1, so we would just have x minus 9 divided by 3 would be 3 equals 0. Now in our reasoning, we would say second, because we should always use a sequencing word to put things in order, and we would say factor out the common factor because, now the reason that we do this is because we need to create a multiplication problem where we have 3x times x minus 3. So we need to create what's called a product. And we would say because the equation must have a product. Next, we make each part of this equation equal to 0. So in this problem, that means that we are going to have 3x equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. So we would say third, create, which means to write, two equations because, and the reason we do this is a special property called of the zero product property. So we would say because of the zero product property. And what that property really says is just if you have a product and you equal 0, then one of the factors must equal 0. Now the next step here would be to solve. So when we divide by 3 on both sides, we would get x equals 0. And when we add 3 on both sides, we would get x equals 3. So we would say for our reasoning, fourth, solve both equations, and we would say because we need the solutions. Finally, at the very last step of every one of these answers, we always state the final answer. So while we don't have to do anything else in the problem, we do have to officially state the answers. So we would say, finally, the solutions are x equals 0 and x equals 3. Now very quickly and briefly, I'm going to go over sort of the essential words here. what are the key vocabulary words that you have to say if you want to get full credit? So let's go back up to the top. The first thing we have to say is a sequencing word in every single sentence. So you'll notice that every single sentence here started with a sequencing word, like first, second, third, or fourth. The next thing that we have to say if we want to get full credit is the word because. Because tells us that here is the answer. So you'll notice, or here is the reason for this step. So we'll notice that every single sentence here, except the last sentence, which is just a statement, has the word because in it. And the reason for that is that the word because tells us this is why we did what we did. The last thing that we need to have in every single sentence is some key vocabulary words. So I'm going to go ahead and put a box around those. In the first sentence, some key vocabulary words, I'm just going to underline them, are subtract and equal 0 and equation. In the second sentence, we need to say factor and common factor. And then we need to say product, because the reason we're making a factoring problem is since we need a product. Next, we always need to say zero product property, and we need to say that we created two equations. This is going to be a hard one for some of you to remember, but it's very important that you use the correct terminology here, zero product property. In the next sentence, we used the word equations and solutions, and in the last sentence, we used the word solutions. Now, the next kind of problem that you're going to see is a problem where you're asked to compare two solution methods. So, for example, here we've got Julie and Matt. They both solved the problem. One of them made a mistake. So if I'm looking at the problem, it says here that it looks from the way that they did this with the quadratic formula. I know that if I was going to do the quadratic formula, what I would do first is make sure that my equation equals 0. Since my equation equals 3, I would start by subtracting the 3 on both sides, and I would have 2x squared minus 1x minus 3 equals 0. So now if I set up my quadratic equation, I would have negative b, sorry you can't really see all that, negative b, which is negative 1, plus or minus the square root of parentheses negative 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3 all over 2 times a, which is 2. So I've got negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now which of these answers matches what I did? Because theoretically I should be able to do this the right way. Well, I'm noticing the only difference between this answer and this answer is that this answer has a positive 3 and this answer has a negative 3. It looks like my answer should have a negative 3 because when I subtracted the 3 on both sides, it became negative. So, based on that, I would say that Julie is wrong. When I write these sentences, the first sentence always says who was wrong. So we would say Julie's solution was incorrect. Then we have to say what was wrong. So we would say Julie used a 3 as her C value. That was wrong. So who, what should she have done? Julie should have used a negative 3 as her C value. And we need to say why. So because the 3 becomes negative when the equation is rearranged. Now the mistake I'm assuming that Julie made here was that instead of subtracting the 3 on both sides, she just used this 3 when we know we should subtract because we need to equal 0. So what are the essential components here? We need to say who, we need to say what, we need to say what should she have done, and we need to say why.
Monday, April 24th, 2017. Please rise for the pledge to the flag.
Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a great day.